Good afternoon to all of you. Welcome to this conference room of our Faculty of Law at Hong Kong U. We are having this seminar, which is co-hosted by various bodies, including the Philip K. Wong Center for Chinese Law of our Faculty of Law, together with the School of Governance and Policy, which I understand is a newly formed body at Hong Kong U, and is also co-hosted by the Center on Contemporary China and the World, as well as the Department of Philosophy of Hong Kong U. So I think this is one of the very few events which is co-hosted by such a large number of bodies. So the title of today's seminar is on law and the ritual, or how best to combat corruption. The title, Law and Ritual, is based on traditional Chinese philosophy, Confucianism, legalism, and so on. And the distinguished speakers today are all scholars of traditional Chinese philosophy. So I will first introduce the speakers, and then I'll invite Professor Daniel Bell to speak about the book, which today's seminar is partly about. And then we'll invite each of the three speakers to speak. I think part of our seminar today is in the form of a dialogue, dialogue between the speakers. So the seminar is based on the book, a new book published by one of the speakers here, Professor Daniel Bell, and the title of the book is Why Ancient Chinese Political Thought Matters: 4 Dialogues on China's Past, Present, and Futures. And it was published by Princeton University Press earlier this year. And I think we all have here copies of the book. So I'll introduce you to Professor Bell and then the other speakers today. Professor Bell is currently the maybe a few sentences. Professor Bell is professor and chair of political theory at the University of Hong Kong, and before he rejoined the University of Hong Kong, he was dean of the School of Political Science and Public Administration at Shandong University, and he has also taught at Tsinghua University. And he also in an earlier stage of his career taught here at the University of Hong Kong too. So he is the author of many important works, such as the China Model, published in 2015, China's New Confucianism, published in 2008, East Meets West, published in 2000, and many other works which I don't have time to read out today. So and Professor Bell will in a minute speak on the new book which I've just mentioned. Sorry, I should also mention one other book, Just Hierarchy, a book co-authored by Professor Bell and Professor Bella Pei, who is also a speaker today. Our second speaker will be Professor Justin Tiwald, professor at the Department of Philosophy of the University of Hong Kong, who has also, like Professor Bell, published widely on Chinese thought, particularly Confucian, Taoist, and New Confucian accounts of moral psychology and well-being. So he is also series co-editor of Oxford Legal Thought, which is a book series. Third speaker, Professor Wang Pei. I didn't know about your English name, Bella. So Professor Bella Wang, or Wang Pei in Chinese, is with the School of Chinese of the University of Hong Kong, where she teaches. Does it mention what you teach? Yeah, Neo-Confucianism is one of her areas of teaching. She also studies and writes about comparative philosophy, Chinese intellectual history, particularly Confucian feminism, and how traditional Confucian virtues can be modified, can be morally justified in modern China. So, so since Professor Bell asked me not to go into too much detail in the introduction, so I will now hand over to Professor Daniel Bell.
Much. Professor world friends stint in Hong Kong U between 96 and 2000. I knew Albert before I knew you two. So this book has two aims. One is to introduce the key debates in political thought, especially from the Warring States period, between the Confucians, the Legalists, the Taoists, and the Mohists, because I think they were the most original and influential in Chinese history. And they were actually, often they were debating with each other, naming each other, arguing with each other. So it made sense to write the book in dialogue form, both to be faithful to what they're actually doing, and also to present those debates in a kind of accessible and entertaining way. The second aim is to show that these debates are still highly relevant today, because the issues that they argue about are timeless. For example, how to minimize corruption in government. Those are huge debates then. And people say, if you want to look at China now, you look at the Marxist tradition or the liberal tradition, there's hardly anything about how to reduce corruption, but the legalists and Confucians have a lot to say. Similar for other debates covered in this book on just and unjust war, on family law, and on whether the state should promote music and culture. Again, these debates are actually have much far richer resources than contemporary traditions like liberalism and Confucianism. And also they have, than liberalism and socialism. Also, just when you meet leaders in mainland China, I don't know many, but for example, as you know, there's an anti-corruption campaign now, and they explicitly appeal to legalism and Confucianism when they discuss it. So clearly, these debates are still highly influential. Now, this book has two versions. One is, it's the same content, but one is published by Princeton University Press's office in Princeton. The other is by the Beijing office of Princeton University Press. And there's kind of let me just read something from the Basic Law. Article 5, the socialist system and policies shall not be practiced in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, and the previous capitalist system and way of life shall remain unchanged for 50 years. Turns out it's the only major constitutional document in the world that has the word capitalism in a positive way. But yet, we're not allowed to sell books here at Hong Kong U. I don't know if that conflicts with the Basic Law, but anyway, what we can do is we have to distribute pamphlets with discount codes. And there's one to buy the book from the Beijing version, one to buy from the Princeton version. I should say that a bit of difference, the Princeton one, the paper is much more, frankly, beautiful. I was a bit surprised. It's just the quality of the paper. But this one is interesting because it has two stamps. Let me just read one. It says, this book is an academic work in political philosophy and the history of political thought. It imagines some fictitious scenario set in the future only for the purpose of conceptual experimentation. So I think Herman would like that part. And theoretical discussion. Narrations involving political decision-making are purely fictitious. They're philosophical scenarios with no reference to any real political entities, events, or ideologies. As author of this work of philosophical fiction, I have great respect for China's political and cultural traditions. An important purpose of this book is to promote greater understanding and appreciation of those great traditions and the book's content is not intended to offend or allude to reality. So this is something that so strictly historical, no, I was kind of asked to write this. And so every book from the Beijing office has this document. It also has an official stamp from the government in Chinese. Basically, it's a formal stamp from the Chinese government, but at the end it says 不认可. It means that it's basically an official stamp saying that we officially say that we do not officially recognize this book. This is one reason why I love China, because only in China could we have this kind of stamp.
Sorry. I must clarify that it doesn't mean that the book is not recognized.
Okay.
It only means I'll read it out.
Okay.
I'll read it out. I'll read it out in full. In 普通话，声明出版物中任何不符合中华人民共和国主权、宪法和法规的内容，概不认可。So what is not recognized is anything in the book, if any, that is inconsistent with the sovereignty, constitution, and the laws of the People's Republic of China.
Okay, so what we're going to discuss today is it's an edited version of chapter 2, and because it's in dialogue form, we will present it in dialogue form. And it's a debate between Xunzi and Han Feizi. And Xunzi, this is towards the end of the Warring States period, the most violent part of the Warring States period, constant warfare, very chaotic society. And they were dealing with many problems, including warfare, but also how to reduce corruption government so you have a more functioning government. And Xunzi was actually head of an academy called the Jixia Xuegong, right? Which is actually, they recently found a place in Shandong where this academy was held. And so now they know exactly where it took place. And probably Han Feizi, who's was his student at this same academy. So we're going to pretend that this academy has been restored as a place for debates in the near future, like 5-10 years from now. And we have descendants of Xunzi and descendants of Han Feizi arguing from the perspective of their forefathers. That's not crazy, because I worked in Shandong for many years, and you had my party secretary was a descendant of Kongzi, Taxing Kong, very proud, you know. So you had, it's very common in China. Also, you have the sense of monks, a Manchus called Wong, who also are proud of their traditions. Han Feizi didn't have any descendants because his family was all killed, I think, right? The Legalists didn't have any descendants, but I don't think Xunzi has descendants. But it's not implausible to imagine that he has descendants who defend the viewpoints of their ancestors. So Xunzi, he has a kind of Confucian moral foundation, but he's also a realist. Again, it's the worst part of the Warring States period, constant warfare. And he says people have a tendency to be bad, but they can overcome that badness through great teachers, through lots of reading of the great works of the past, and most important, through rituals that provide a sense of community among the participants. And if you have a sense of community among participants and you rely more on ritual to have social order, you don't have to rely on law and heavy use of punishment to have social order. His student, Han Feizi, he accepted the premise that we are born bad, but he said we can't improve. So he is very cynical about the possibility of improvement, and he thought the only way to have social order is by using harsh punishments to make people fall into line. And if you want to reduce corruption government, the only way to do so is to rely on harsh punishments. Who's right? Well, that's what we're going to argue about today. And the moderator will be, well, we don't have your name in here, but for the purpose of this, it should be just Professor Wong. She will be the moderator of this debate. And she is kind of in China, often the moderators are not as kind of neutral empires, so maybe it has more of a tendency, kind of a liberal viewpoints. So she will begin the debate. I should say that Justin, my friend Justin, we're all actually, it won't be clear maybe during the debate because we're going to hate each other, but let me just say now that we're neighbors and very close friends, and he has a wonderful podcast called This Is the Way, where we actually discuss part of chapter 2 as well. I recommend that. And Professor Wong has a book coming out, Confucian as a Way of Life, which will be wonderful as well. So we're going to start. I'm dressed in black because I'm playing the part of Han Feizi, and I will put on my CIA sunglasses. I think if Han Feizi were around today, he would probably work for the CIA. And so why don't you begin?
Welcome to Qixia Academy. It is a great honor to preside over our first debate in 2200 years. I'd like to thank the Shandong government for providing the resources that allowed us to rebuild the academy. Today's debate, as you know, is about how best to combat corruption in government and the society at large. The debaters are Professor Xun, Chief Libationer of the Jixia Academy, and his student, Han Fei. Professor Xun, please go first.
Rather let my student go first. As Confucius said, students should be regarded with awe because they eventually.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor. Oh, thank you, Professor. I'm sure we agree that corruption, let's define it as a wrongful misuse of public power for private or family interests, needs to be eliminated. If wicked ministers, even though they have not produced any accomplishments, enjoy safety and profit, then corrupt officials will come to the fore. This is the beginning of the downfall of the state.
Yes, I agree.
The question is how to combat corruption. The state must be wealthy and powerful with the capacity to put down private scheming. When we quote from the text, we're going to go like this. This means that we're actually quoting from the text.
Okay. Sorry.
The question is how to combat corruption. The state must be wealthy and powerful with the capacity to put down private scheming. And what are the methods for achieving wealth and power? As I see it, we need commitment to the law. He who can put an end to private scheming and make people uphold the public law will see his people secure and his state well ordered. He who can block selfish pursuits and enforce public law will see his armies growing stronger and his enemies weakening. The ruler must enforce the law without exceptions. If penalties are not enforced, then evil will never be surmounted. One should use laws to govern the state, disposing of all matters on this basis alone.
Okay, I agree that laws are important, but they are not sufficient. We need public officials of good character to ensure that they don't misuse public resources for their own benefit.
We need good laws, not good people. When a sage governs a state, he does not wait for people to be good in deference to him. Instead, he creates a situation in which people find it impossible to do wrong. If you wait for people to be good in deference to you, you will find that there are no more than 10 good people within the borders of your state. But if you create a situation in which people find it impossible to do wrong, the entire state can be brought into compliance. In governing, one must use what is numerous and abandon what is scarce. Therefore, the state does not work on his virtue, he works on his laws.
Yeah, but surely there's also a role for moral education.
The law provides the only education. There are no words, these of learned masters. The civil officers are the only teachers.
Okay, wait a minute. So do you mean to deny that people can improve? Why should we always assume the very worst of people?
People pursue their self-interest, and there's nothing we can do to change that. The natural aspirations of the people are such that they all move towards security and benefit and avoid danger and poverty.
But that's such a stunted view of human nature. The great sages of the past governed mainly by virtue, not by means of laws that prevented wrongdoing. Why can't we seek inspiration from the great rulers of the past?
Look, the Confucians and Mohists all claim the former kings loved everyone in the whole world equally and looked upon the people like parents look upon their children. But if one holds that when ruler and subject are like father and son, there will always be order, this implies there was never any disorder between fathers and sons. In the nature and disposition of human beings, nothing is more primary than the love of parents for children. Children are loved by their parents, and yet children are not always well behaved. Even if one loves a child deeply, how does that prevent the child from being unruly?
Okay, I'm glad you hear that you recognize some form of love, I guess.
Yes, but family love is dangerous for the state. There was a man of Lu, the state of Lu, who accompanied his sovereign to war. 3 times he went into battle, and 3 times he ran away. When Confucius asked him for the reason, he replied, I have an aged father, and if I should die, there would be no one to take care of him. Confucius, considering the man filial, recommended him and had him promoted to a post in government. Thus, we see that a man who was a filial son to his father may be.
That story sounds like fabrication. In any case, it makes sense to exempt those who care for elderly parents from corruption if no one else can provide for the care. Even states like Israel exempt single children from military service.
My point is that only law backed by harsh punishment works.
The great sages of the past did secure order by means of virtue. They didn't rely on laws with harsh punishments.
The great sages could govern with virtue because people were few and goods were plentiful. But then we had population growth. Nowadays, the people are plenty, and while commodities and goods are few, people work laboriously, but provisions are scanty. Hence, the people compete. It's absurd to use the old ways to govern the present. The sage does not expect to follow the ways of the ancients or model his behavior on an unchanging standard of what is acceptable. He examines the affairs of the age and then makes the preparations accordingly. Among the people of Song, there was a farmer who had a stump in the middle of the field. One day, a rabbit running across the field crashed into the stump, broke its neck, and died. Seeing this, the man put aside his plow and took up watch next to the stump, hoping that he could get another rabbit like this. And soon he became the laughing stock of the entire state of Song. Now, if one wants to use the government of the former kings to bring about order, the people of the current age, this is all just so much stump watching.
守株待兔. That's a colorful story, but nobody's arguing for stump watching. Of course, we can't govern entirely by virtue in an age of material scarcity. I concede that much. But you're arguing for the opposite. You're arguing for governing entirely by law, with no room at all for virtue. All right, so let's think of the contemporary situation. We tried your methods with the campaign against corruption. Millions of officials have been subject to harsh punishment because of corrupt policies, corrupt practices. I do not deny that it has worked to a certain extent. However, public officials are less openly corrupt, and there is less buying of government posts. Ordinary citizens perceive the system as less unfair because it's now possible to access public services without paying bribes and gifts to bureaucrats. But the campaign has had disastrous side effects. Today, public officials think almost all the time about what can go wrong, to the point that decision-making has become virtually paralyzed. And the anti-corruption drive has created huge numbers of political enemies who may be rooting for the downfall of leaders, if not for the whole political system. So the legalist campaign may have worked, at least in part, in the short term, but it may well lead to the downfall of the state. There's no end in sight, and the more it lasts, the more the state is in danger.
The problem is not with legalism per se. The problem is that the campaign has been insufficiently legalist. Not just any kind of law will deter bad behavior. Yes, the punishment must be strict even for small offenses. So far, so good. But the law must be applied equally to all, regardless of social status. The punishment of transgressions does not bypass the great ministers. If the enlightened ruler forgave penalties, the corrupt minister will find it easy to do wrong. Those who make genuine errors must always be punished, even if they're close and cherished. The laws must be strict, but they must be consistently applied. When assigning penalties, it's best to make them heavy and inescapable so that people will fear them, including those close to the ruler. Not only that, the law should be clear and easy to understand. Language that is subtle and mysterious is something that even the wisest people find difficult to understand. So if, when making laws for the masses, you use language that even the wisest people find difficult to understand, then no one will comprehend or follow your laws.
Okay, so, well, admittedly, the anti-corruption campaign has not been driven by anything that looks like consistent adherence to law.
Yes, the punishments must be harsh to deter corrupt behavior, but the law must also be clear, easy to understand, and consistently applied. We need more legalism, not less.
I still don't think you're getting to the heart of the problem. We can't eliminate corruption simply by relying on law. Even the best kind of legal institutions won't work if people are not committed to morality. Laws are not enough to stop people from doing bad things. Corruption in government can't be eliminated entirely by relying on fear of being punished.
May have overstated things. Laws can constrain wicked behavior by common people. For public officials in a complex bureaucratic system, however, we also need appropriate administrative methods to limit corruption. First, ministers should not be free to enforce the laws as they please. If the ruler lends even a little of his power to others, then superior and inferior will exchange places. Hence, it is said that no minister should be allowed to borrow the power and authority of the ruler. Second, political factions should not be allowed to form. When relationships are profuse and confederates are numerous, so that cliques and factions flourish both inside and outside the state, then even if a minister commits a great transgression, he will have ample means to cover it up. Thus, the corrupt and wicked ministers enjoy security and profits, even though they have not produced any achievements. Worse, it could spell the end for the ruler. The only reason the ministers do not assassinate their sovereign is that their parties and cliques are not strong enough. Hence, if the ruler loses an inch, his subordinates will give a yard. The ruler needs to atomize the ministers so that they can accumulate power by gathering in groups.
Okay, and like the laws, these methods and tactics for controlling ministers should be clear and transparent. But if they are clear to the ministers, they will find a way to circumvent them if they can get away with it, right? It won't prevent corruption.
Exactly. So some methods to control ministers must not be too open. As for such techniques, they're hidden in the chest. It is that through which you match up the various ends from your secret place to steer the ministers. Therefore, laws are best when they're clear, whereas techniques should not be seen. Such techniques include to issue edicts and make wily dispositions. Keep your knowledge to yourself and ask for advice, and say the opposite of what you mean and do the opposite of what you intend. With these techniques, the ruler can keep the ministers atomized and guessing what the ruler's intentions. They can form factions to misappropriate the resources of the state or subvert the ruler. Hide your tracks, conceal your sources so that your subordinates cannot trace the springs of your action.
Okay, now I'm confused. It'll be hard for the bureaucracy to get any work done if administrative methods are kept secret.
Well, some methods need to be open. In the bureaucracy, it is important to assign one man to each office and not let people talk to each other. There needs to be an absolutely clear bureaucratic division of labor with no overlap. Moreover, ministers should be rewarded strictly according to the performance of assigned tasks, not according to reputation.
Okay, it all sounds very scientific. I can understand why the ruler would want to punish public officials who don't do what they are supposed to do. But what if they do more than the assigned task?
That's a recipe for disaster. Once in the past, the Marquis Zhao of Han got drunk and fell asleep. The keeper of the royal hat, seeing that the Marquis was cold, laid a robe over him. When the Marquis awoke, he was pleased and asked his attendants, "Who covered me with the robe?" "The keeper of the hat," they replied. The Marquis thereupon punished both the keeper of the royal hat and the keeper of the royal robe. He punished the keeper of the robe for failing to do his duty, and the keeper of the hat for overstepping his office. It was not that he did not dislike the cold, but he considered the trespass of one official upon the duties of another to be a greater danger than cold. Hence, an enlightened ruler, in handling his ministers, does not permit them to gain merit by overstepping their offices, or to speak words that do not tally with their actions. Those who overstep are condemned to die. Those whose words and actions do not tally are punished. If the ministers are made to stick to their proper duties and speak only what is appropriate, then they will be unable to band together in cliques and work for each other's benefit.
What? Surely you don't believe what you're saying. If well-intentioned ministers are condemned to die just because they step outside of their assigned roles, I can assure you that that will quickly doom the state. Nobody will take any initiative in response to any new situations. What if a minister happens to come across a piece of information that, say, terrorists are about to blow up the presidential palace? Should she not report that information if it's not part of her official job description?
Such cases are exceptionally rare. We shouldn't change administrative methods just because of some imaginary scenarios.
Not only do you assume the worst of common people, you also assume the worst of public officials. Do you really mean to deny that the political system can benefit by selecting and promoting public-spirited officials with some discretion to exercise their own moral judgment? Surely we should seek out public officials who are less likely to be corrupt, at least.
There are too few of them. The inborn dispositions and nature of people are such that the worthy are few while the unworthy are numerous. We can't build a bureaucratic system on the assumption most public officials won't be selfish.
No, you still don't get the point. Fear isn't sufficient to rein in the public officials, and law isn't sufficient to secure public order. As Confucius famously said, quote, "If you guide the people with coercive regulations and keep them in line with punishments, the people will become evasive and will have no conscience. If, however, you guide them with virtue and keep them in order by means of ritual, the people will have a conscience and will rectify themselves," end quote. If the ruler relies only on harsh laws and administrative injunctions, people will seek to evade them as soon as they get a chance to do so. The best way to secure order is to win people's hearts and minds.
Yeah, my teacher's so naive. Those who don't understand the art of governing always say, oh, one must win the hearts of the people. If one could bring about order simply by seeking to win the hearts of the people, all one would have to do is listen to the people. But the wisdom of the people cannot be used because their minds are like the minds of infants. If an infant's boils are not lanced, the swelling will become worse. Nevertheless, when an infant's boils are lanced, someone has to hold the infant while its loving mother takes care of these things, and the infant will scream and cry endlessly because it does not understand that enduring this little bit of discomfort will bring about a great benefit. Those above draw up penal codes and establish heavy penalties in order to put an end to wickedness, but the people think their superiors are being harsh. So yes, harsh laws are not popular, but the ruler needs to implement them for the people's long-term interests.
You really have zero faith in the good sense of the people. And you think public officials should not be selected on the basis of virtue, but you have tremendous faith in the virtue and wisdom of the ruler who can design the laws and the administrative methods that benefit the long-term interest of the people.
I don't expect too much of the ruler either. The ruler shouldn't be too virtuous. In fact, a humane ruler can harm the state. When a humane individual is in power, those below will be unrestrained and think little of violating prohibitions and laws. They will look to luck and be lazy and will hope for good things from their superior. Kindness is the road to ruin. Being kind means that you cannot bear to inflict suffering. If the ruler cannot bear to inflict suffering, he will not execute criminals. If he likes giving presents, he will reward people without waiting for them to deserve it. If criminals are not punished and undeserved people are rewarded, how can the ruler not come to ruin?
Okay, so you think the ruler should not be kind to the people, but you did allow for the possibility of family love. At minimum, the ruler can be kind to loved ones, right?
Absolutely not. The ruler cannot be family oriented. In fact, he should worry most about relatives and heirs apparent who stand to profit by his death. Prepare as you may against those who hate you. Calamity will come from those who love you. The ruler must learn not to love. He must be able, not humane. And we only need one able ruler, but officers with sage-like understanding. Once the machine is in place, so to speak, it will run by itself. Public officials will stick to their roles and the people will submit to the law. Then subsequent rulers need not interfere. The point is to maximize the power of the state, not the private advantage of the ruler.
It sounds like a miserable life for the ruler as well. He cannot get love from anybody and he must hide himself and refrain from any enjoyment.
Exactly. The ruler must not reveal his desires, for if he reveals his desires, his ministers will put on a mask that pleases him. He must not reveal his will, for if he does so, his ministers will show a different face. The enlightened ruler reposes in non-action, and below his ministers will tremble with fear. The system will work well, even with mediocre rulers. If the mediocre rulers hold to the law and depend on the power of the position, there will be order. But if they abandon the power of the position and turn their backs on the law, there will be disorder. The important thing is for rulers to refrain from interfering with the system. If they show their desires, they can be manipulated by their underlings.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, you propose to put in place a system that's in no one's interest. Everybody will work for the sake of increasing the wealth and power of the state. If it succeeds, everyone will be miserable. The people will live in fear of the law, and the ministers will live in fear of the ruler. Even the ruler will live a miserable life. He'll be cut off from family, friends, and ministers, and with no freedom or power to act on his desires.
Beautiful. Thank you. Exactly. In effect, laws and policies are inimical to the private interests of the officials and the common people, and the ruler must learn to rein in his private desires. In the short term, no one benefits, The point is to secure order, whatever the cost, and without any show of mercy. Once, when the state of Qin had a great famine, the ruler the Marquis Ying petitioned His Majesty, saying, "The grass, the vegetables, acorns, dates, and chestnuts in the 5 parks are sufficient to save the people. May your Majesty give them out." In reply, King Zhao of Xiang said, in accordance with the law of our country, the people should be rewarded for merits and punished for crimes. If I give out vegetables and fruits of the 5 parks, I will be reward men of merit and no merit equally. To be sure, to reward men of merit and no merit equally leads to disorder. Indeed, instead of giving out the products of the 5 parks and thereby inviting confusion, we may as well discard the fruits and vegetables and maintain order. Let the people starve.
But that is so inhumane. Are you completely insensitive to people suffering? Nobody deserves to die as a result of natural calamities. Can you really call that merit? The whole underlying purpose of the law should be to benefit the people. But you say the government should starve the people in order to maintain some sort of legal system that supposedly secures political order.
Yeah, but eventually everyone will benefit. Once a system that strengthens the public interest of the state is in place, there will be no corruption in government because officials fulfill their assigned roles, and there'll be no need to implement harsh punishments because people are made aware of the laws that prevent wicked behavior. When no one in the world harms one another, this is the pinnacle of good government. Yet the stupid people don't understand it and condemn it as draconian. Severe penalties and heavy convictions are hated by the people, but the state can only be ordered by them. The sage who makes laws in the state is always acting contrary to the prevailing opinions of the age, but in accord with the way.
I guess I'm one of those stupid people. I still don't understand how we are supposed to get from cruel means that establish a quasi-totalitarian society where everybody serves the state out of fear of to the utopian goal of where peace and order reign on earth. How do we get from one to the other? More likely, the people will fear great resentment at the cruel means and will rebel whenever possible. And the ministers will find ways to sabotage the machine. They won't be satisfied sticking to one narrowly defined bureaucratic role. Even the ruler will rebel against being kept in a gilded cage. Still, for the sake of argument, let's concede that we reach your account of utopia. What happens when a new situation arises that requires new policies? We can't predict the future except for one thing. It will look very different. You yourself said the ruler should change with the times, but if the ruler is hidden, how can you promulgate new laws and policies?
Artificial intelligence can help with the adjustments. With AI's help, I'm more confident than ever that the system can work. Still, the ruler should be prepared to exercise power on rare occasions, if absolutely necessary. The ruler does not try to work side by side with his people, so they respect the dignity of his position. The ruler accumulates mystique and dignity precisely by making godlike in his isolation. And so on the rare occasions when he does have to interfere, he'll be able to make necessary changes to the computer, so to speak. Power can be increased precisely by doing nothing most of the time.
Hanfei, I still think you're not getting my point. Even in an ideal legalist society, with well-designed laws and administrative methods, there will still be a need for human judgment, especially in hard cases, when rules conflict or when new situations arise. How to interpret the law is not always clear, nor is it always clear whether and when to adhere to a particular law. And for those cases, it helps to have leaders and ministers with good moral character who are more likely to know when and how to break or bend the rules. Conversely, if government officials are not committed to the public interest, they will often find ways to get around the laws, no matter how stiff the punishments.
Well, most of the time, the laws will work without any need for human judgments. The law is the law. And I worry more about roaming scholars like you who install doubt in the law than about the rare cases when the law may not be so clear. In a disordered state, its scholars praise the ways of the former kings and imitate their humaneness and righteousness, put on a fair appearance and speak in elegant phrases, thus casting doubt upon the laws of the time and causing the ruler to be of 2 minds. If the rulers do not wipe out such vermin, they should not be surprised when they look about the area within the 4 seas to see states perish and ruling houses wane and die. So the state needs to purge troublemaking scholars.
So you think that I, your teacher, should be wiped out? How can I teach such students?
Professor, If I'm successful, I'd also be superfluous. There would be no need for political advisors like me. But I care more about laws that benefit the state than about my own private interests.
Can you believe that? You think you're the only sage and the rest of us should blindly obey what you say? Oh,
Calm down, gentlemen. Han is an original thinker, but with a moral compass that seems seriously out of whack. He proposes an elaborate system of harsh laws and bureaucratic methods designed to strengthen the wealth and the power of the state and to reduce corruption and private misuses of resources. Such measures might be effective in times of chaos, but the price seems too high. The people and the ministers will live in fear, and the ruler himself cannot do things that make him happy.
The ruler can set laws that more or less make him happy, so long as they don't diminish the power of the state. And fear is only necessary to start. Eventually, people will internalize the laws, and once they do so, they no longer need to fear them, so long as they are law-abiding.
But you do not persuasively show how we can transition to a peaceful and orderly society where the laws and methods work on behalf of the people. And even your ideal society would make no room for things that make life seem worth living. Culture, intellectual curiosity, travel, and the celebration of diversity. It's quite a terrifying vision. Let's hear what Professor Xun has to say about the best way to reduce corruption of the state.
right. Okay. So, what's most important is to have public spirited officials in government who won't be corrupt even when the application of the law is unclear or when nobody is watching over them. How to increase the possibility that good officials rule the people? Ritual matters more than law here because only ritual can change people's hearts.
Fine words, but it won't work in times of chaos.
Quote, if the state is chaotic, will the exemplary person not order it? I say bringing order to the chaotic state does not mean employing the chaos in order to order it. One eliminates chaos and replaces it with order. Bringing cultivation to a corrupt person does not mean employing his corruption in order to cultivate him. One eliminates corruption and replaces it with cultivation. As such, the exemplary person eliminates the chaos. He does not order the chaos. He eliminates the corruption. He does not cultivate corruption. The proper employment of the term to order is as when one says that the exemplary person, quote, does what is orderly and does not do what is chaotic, does what is cultivated and does not do what is corrupt. The only way to create a political order where public officials serve the common good rather than themselves is to employ public officials who have been properly educated. They must serve the public because they want to, not because they're forced to.
How can you cultivate such individuals? You seem to have a very optimistic view of human nature.
Oh, not at all. Quote, people are born with a tendency to badness, unquote. If people blindly follow their bodily natures and indulge their natural inclinations, aggressiveness and exploitation are sure to develop, resulting in cruel tyranny.
I agree with that. That's why we need strict laws to control the people.
Yeah, but you dogmatically deny that people can change for the better. My view is that people, quote, can be made good by deliberate effort, end quote.
Sounds quite mysterious to me. I certainly wouldn't construct a political order on the people on the assumption people can be morally improved. It's a fool's errand.
Why are you so pessimistic? People can be transformed by means of rituals. Quote, the ancient exemplary rulers hated chaos, and so they established rituals and standards of rightness in order to divide things between people, to civilize their desires, to satisfy their seeking. They caused desires never to exhaust material goods and material goods never to be depleted by desires, so the two support each other and prosper. This is how ritual arose, end quote. We can learn to regulate our natural desires so that there is a better fit between what we want to do and the goods available in society, resulting in social peace and material well-being. Rituals provide bonds not based solely on kinship that allow people to partake of the benefits of cooperative social existence in larger scale societies.
You think social rituals are sufficient to change people's selfish nature?
No, I don't think that. We need to start with a commitment to begin to learning from the sages of the past. Quote, where does learning begin? Where does it end? I say its order begins with reciting the classics and ends with studying ritual. Its purpose begins with becoming a well-bred person and ends with becoming a sage. If you truly accumulate effort for a long time, then you will advance. Learning proceeds until death, and only then does it stop. End quote. It's a difficult process that requires lifelong commitment, of course. We need good teachers too, at least in the initial learning stage. Quote, since people have a tendency to badness, they must await teachers and proper models, and only then will they correct. Without teachers or without proper models for people, they will be deviant, dangerous, and not correct. With good teachers and models, rituals can do their transformative work.
You seem to place a lot of faith in teachers and good models. I guess it didn't work with me. But I still don't understand how ritual is supposed to improve people, especially if the aim is to make them more public spirited. Look at the rituals today. Members of the mafia have elaborate rituals to induct new members of their criminal organizations, and crazed football fans sing chants that demonize opposing teams. How do such rituals contribute to the public interest?
Oh, indeed. We need to differentiate between good and bad rituals. Good rituals change people's character for the better. They make people less selfish and more committed to the public interest. Let's call them public spirited rituals. I will use the word ritual in that sense.
Professor Xun, please say more. What are the features of rituals that are beneficial to the public? And how can they help to reduce corruption in government?
Okay, let me respond to the first question first. Good rituals must promote a long-lasting sense of care and community among participants, with the possibility of extending the bonding to those who do not directly participate in the ritual. So first, rituals must be social. They must involve more than one person. The village wine ceremony is an example of the social ritual that makes people feel as one. Quote, young and old take a drink from the wine cup in order of age. At the conclusion, the tankard is rinsed and washed. In this way, we know that it is possible for junior and senior to drink together without anyone being left out, end quote. By means of this ritual, all members of the community, whatever their social status, establish bonds that extend beyond the ritual itself. They benefit not just those with more power, social power, but also those at the bottom of the social hierarchies.
I don't see how promoting drunkenness can help to limit people's selfish desires. Let's organize a banquet and see what happens. Those at the bottom of hierarchies will be forced to placate their bosses. Women will be sexually harassed, etc.
We can't just invent rituals out of thin air. It's not a matter of personal choice. Again, quote, the ancient exemplary rulers hated chaos, and so they established rituals and rightness in order to divide things between people and civilize their desires, end quote. The main point of ritual is to regulate what people do and transform their desires so that they become civilized. The sage rulers of the past were careful to invent and promote rituals that serve socially beneficial purposes. We should follow the rituals handed down to us by the great sage rulers and that have proven to be socially beneficial over the course of time.
Is there a historical record of such sage rulers who invented, quote, good rituals?
It was a long time ago. We don't have a clear idea of the past, especially the long distant past. But the correct rituals are correct because they have succeeded at achieving desirable social purposes over hundreds, if not thousands of years. And sage-like interpreters have the capacity to discern these patterns even without a clear view of the origin of the rituals.
So we should just blindly follow the rituals of the past, like the man who waits for the rabbit to hit the tree. Just because sage-like interpreters tell us to do so. But what worked in the past won't necessarily work now. Even if rituals serve desirable purposes in the past, there's no reason they will do so now. Look around you. Fewer and fewer people follow traditional rituals or rituals of any sort. And when they do so, it's because of social pressure. Such rituals rarely have transformative effect. That's why when we tend to think of rituals as empty, the form is there without any emotion.
Empty. Good rituals involve emotion and form. Rituals reach their highest perfection when both emotion and form are fully realized. Again, the main point of ritual is to civilize our animal natures. And if people are just going through their outward routines without any emotion, they're not likely to transform their natures. A ritual needs to involve or trigger an emotional response so that it will have an effect on the participants, both during and beyond the ritual itself. That's why the great sage rulers of the past invented music to accompany the rituals. Quote, they caused the progression, complexity, intensity, and rhythm of the music to be sufficient to move the goodness in people's hearts. When music is performed in the ancestral temple and the rulers and the ministers and superiors and inferiors listen to it together, none fail to become harmoniously respectful. It is insufficient to lead people in a single unified way. It is sufficient to lead people in a single unified way, and it is sufficient to bring order to the myriad changes within them, end quote. There's a good reason why in Chinese, as you know, we often say li yue, ritual and music, as though the two are inseparable. Beautiful music engages with the emotions and helps to ensure that rituals have their transformative effect.
My point is that we shouldn't blindly copy rituals from the past. They may have been effective in an age of plenty when people had nothing better than to do than participate in drinking activities accompanied by pleasant music. But that won't help much today in an age of limited resources and when people are at each other's throats. Your hero Confucius advocated a 3-year mourning period for dead parents. Surely you don't advocate restoration of such rituals from the past.
Oh, I do. Something happened in modern society. Rituals that provide a community have been replaced by a cult of the self, and the ones left over are often too short to do their work. We do need to restore effective rituals from the past. It's worth asking, what is the reason for the 3-year mourning period? I say, it takes measure of people's dispositions and establishes a proper form for them. Is a method that is to be neither adapted nor changed. It's necessary to have a long ritual, quote, when a wound is colossal, when pain is profound, the recovery is slow. The 3-year mourning period is a form established with reference to emotions, is the means by which one conveys the acme of one's pain, end quote. Such deep emotions threaten to throw our lives completely out of whack, and rituals provide suitable forms for their expression, and they work best if they last a long time.
But why 3 years? It seems completely arbitrary. Do you deny that rituals can change with the times?
No, of course not. Those who lack the energy to complete morning rituals should be given a little leeway. Quote, after the age of 50, one is not to perform the morning ritual in its entirety. After the age of 70, it is only the wearing of the mourning garments that is to be kept, end quote. In times of COVID, people were deprived of traditional ways of mourning, but end-of-life rituals were too important to omit, and they often took new forms, even if they involved health risks to the participants. Some things matter more than good health. So we should do our best to maintain and restore traditional rituals, but the details can be changed according to context. The forms of the rituals can vary from community to community. Quote, the people of Lu use cups as a tribute. The people of Wei use vats. People of Qi use containers made of hide, end quote. But they still serve the same purpose. The relatively intelligent and socially minded person who is aware of the main point of the ritual to civilize emotions and create a sense of community that extends beyond the ritual itself, that person can adjust the details of the ritual in accordance with the situation so that rituals are made to serve their point. To be effective, as I mentioned, they must engage the emotions. The effect should be long-lasting.
And you could just pick and choose the rituals that serve that purpose.
No, we should look to rituals that worked in the past. The longer they lasted, the more likely they were to be effective at generating social bonds between people. And whenever the true origin of the rituals, what matters is that people come to believe, as mentioned, that the rituals were established by sage rulers of the past. If people believe the rituals originated with the sage rulers of the past, the rituals will be endowed with an aura of sacredness that increases the likelihood that people care for and follow them. If they are grounded in tradition, they can also help to bind people in an intergenerational community.
You certainly place a lot of faith in history, even if it's distorted for your purposes.
Well, we should also look to findings that transcend their historical context. Quote, there is one measure in ancient times and in the present, end quote. Social science findings about rituals that generate social bonds can help us to identify those measures. For one thing, rituals that bind people together tend to be performed regularly. If they are performed with high frequency, like national anthems sung every day at school, they can bind the people to the community, even if they're not very spectacular or particularly exciting. Other sorts of rituals can bind people for the long term by means of emotionally intense and extravagant practices that imprint in people's memory, if not in their bodies. Think of the coming of age circumcision ritual for teenage boys, or firewalking rituals performed by certain tribes. Rituals that are extremely difficult and time consuming to perform, such as the 3-year mourning ritual, serve to cement social glue. Mourning rituals should not be too easy to carry out. Quote, wearing this mourning garments, propping oneself up on a crude cane, dwelling in a lean-to, eating gruel, and using a rough mat and earthen pillow are the means by which one ornaments the utmost hurt, end quote. Such rituals both express intense emotional pain and leave a lasting imprint that binds those who participate in the rituals.
Oh, so like the hazing rituals in fraternities or cutting off parts of fingers to initiate people into criminal gangs, I can see why they would leave a lasting imprint. But I can't see how they can help with social bonding at large, much less combating corruption in government.
Again, the social rituals must be carefully designed in practice so that they generate a broader sense of community.
Professor Xun, you repeatedly emphasize the importance of mourning rituals, even if they serve to help to moderate the emotions of those who grieve at deaths of loved ones. How can they help society at large? Please recall, the question we're discussing is how best to combat corruption in government. How can mourning rituals help with that?
Okay, if we care about long-term effectiveness, the only way to combat corruption is to make people more public-spirited and sensitive to the suffering of others. If our government officials are more public-spirited, they'll be more willing to serve the public and less likely to misuse public resources for their own selfish purposes. So how to change the motivation of public officials so that they care more about the public interest? Again, the mechanism is to change them via social rituals that have proven to be effective for that purpose. That's why I emphasize rituals involving proper treatment of the dead. The dead, for obvious reasons, are the least capable of protecting their interests. They are quite literally the worst off of the worst off. Hence, those with power, the living, need to be trained by means of certain rituals to treat them with love and respect. It is important to adorn the corpse because, quote, if the corpse is not adorned, it becomes hideous, and if it is hideous, no grief will be felt, end quote. The corpse must be gradually moved further away each time it is adorned because, quote, if kept close at hand, one begins to scorn it. When having it close at hand makes it the object of scorn, one begins to weary of it. When one wearies of it, one forgets one's duty to it. And if one forgets one's duties, then one no longer shows proper respect, end quote. The ritual should be gradually phased out so that it allows for a smooth transition to everyday life, quote, whereby he cares for the needs of the living, end quote. The moral effect is clear. If the ritual is done properly, it cultivates an altruistic outlook. The living care for the dead cannot reciprocate. It's a pure form of caring for others. Then altruism can be extended to those who need care in the world of the living. We can be sure that public officials who undergo such rituals will care for the people and not be corrupt.
Ridiculous. My professor thinks that forcing people to care for dead bodies is the way to reduce corruption in government?
No forcing. Moral education and perhaps social pressure can help at the start because some people only discover the value of rituals after they partake of them. But rituals should be non-coercive. They should not be forced upon the people.
Rituals are so great. Why not make them legally compulsory?
Rituals won't have transformative effects if people feel forced to partake of the rituals. Fear of punishment is not likely to produce the sorts of emotions that generate a sense of community. If people engage in rituals because they feel forced to, the rituals are likely to become empty displays of form and devoid of any sort of other regarding emotion. To repeat, quote, rituals reach their highest perfection when both emotion and form are fully realized, end quote. People should perform rituals because they want to, not because they have to, so they can generate emotions that involve care for the needy.
So you deny that people should be punished for doing bad things? I thought you saw a role for law.
It's not either or, dear student. Laws may be necessary as a backup when rituals fail to do their work. But generally speaking, there is a trade-off. The more society relies on social rituals to regulate people, the better off the society. Let's distinguish between different ways of exercising power. Quote, there is the power to inspire awe that comes from the moral way and virtue. There is the power to inspire awe that comes from being harsh and stringent, end quote. These can be arranged in order of desirability. In the best kind of society, ritual and exemplary music are cultivated, social divisions and rightness are made clear, government policies and acts are timely, concern for and benefit for the people are manifest. In the less desirable, legalistic society, rituals and exemplary music are not cultivated, but, quote, nevertheless, the ruler's prohibitions and penalties against those who are violent are stringent. His execution of those who do not submit are thoroughgoing. The punishments and penalties that he assigns are hefty and can be trusted to be applied, and the executions and killings that he commands are fierce and certain to be carried out, falling upon people as swiftly as a clap of thunder, striking them or collapsing, or a collapsing wall crushing them, end quote.
That's my kind of power. Surely it's better than a society without any laws.
Yes, in the worst kind of society, quote, there is the power to inspire awe that comes from being wild and reckless. The ruler lacks a heart that is concerned for the people. He makes no effort to benefit the people, and instead he daily practices ways that create chaos among people. When things are like this, then those below will definitely conspire secretly and move in a surge to abandon their superior, end quote. So I don't deny that legalist practices may be necessary in a non-ideal world if the alternative is tyranny and chaos. But too much legalism is not stable. Here too, people will rebel eventually, and corruption can get out of hand because public officials will misuse public resources if they think they can get away with it. Harsh punishments cannot be used indefinitely, and once the ruler relaxes a bit, quote, he will have no way to keep hold of subordinates. So that's why I favor a society ruled mainly by ritual. And, quote, if one discards the rituals, this is getting rid of the markers. And so people can become lost and confused and fall into disasters and troubles. This is why punishments and penalties become profuse, end quote. There is, one might say, an inverse correlation between the use of rituals and the use of punishments in society. The best form of society would secure social order without any coercion.
My teacher tends to slip into flights of utopian fancy. Do you think we can implement an ideal society now, or do we have to wait for something like Karl Marx's higher communism, where people can do as they see fit because advanced machinery does all the necessary work? There's material abundance, no more social classes, and the state would have withered away.
Well, we cannot do away with social hierarchy. Here too, rituals can help because they specify different for different people. Good rituals involve common social practices that treat people differently, and they generate a sense of community among people, including special concern for the well-being of those with less power. Putting rituals into practice means, quote, treating the eminent in a respectful way, fulfilling one's duties to the old, behaving with fraternal courtesy toward one's elders, treating the young with affection, and being kind to the humble, end quote. So yes, there is a social hierarchy, but in a society that practices rituals, those with power will come to care about the needs and interests of those with less power.
Ridiculous. But the ultimate aim is to do away with legal punishments?
Well, as things stand, that's not possible, but resources are limited and we need punishments to constrain those who would take more than their fair share. Most people, given the chance to do so, will try to satisfy their immediate desires and pursue their private interests, regardless of the impact of the public interest. They must be constrained from doing so by means of legal punishments.
Here we agree.
Yeah, but I think everyone has the capacity to be virtuous. The problem is that it takes deliberate effort, and most people have neither the time nor the inclination to do so. Luckily, a minority of educated people can be made to understand the function of ritual. They can become more fully transformed by participating in rituals and develop refined social sensibilities. Quote, one consolidates one's grip on the well-bred people by means of ritual, end quote. In a non-ideal society, quote, the minor officials will, on up, must be regulated by ritual and exemplary music, but the masses and commoners must be controlled by laws and regulations. End quote. It's important to use ritual to treat those bearing goodness and use punishment to treat those bearing badness. Then the worthy and unworthy will not be jumbled up, and what is right and what is wrong will not be confused. End quote. So we must find a way to elevate the worthy, to select and promote public officials who can be regulated by ritual regardless of family background. What we need is a political meritocracy. Skip it? Okay.
No, it's
Okay, right. What we need is a political meritocracy where everyone has an equal opportunity at the start. And the political system then should select and promote those with above average ability who can be transformed into relatively virtuous public officials by means of learning and ritual. That's the best way to combat corruption in the long term.
Professor Xun, let's assume that we succeeded in selecting and promoting high-quality public officials who submit to ritual and rightness. Will the system work if the rest of the population is purely self-serving and prone to corruption? It will be a challenge for any government, no matter how virtuous, to rule over a nation of devils. If the commoners have no commitment to paying taxes and find ways of evading their civic duties, for example, the state might collapse, no matter how virtuous the public officials. Shouldn't the rituals aim to transform the general public, not just the ruling elite?
Yes, of course, they should aim to transform the general public too. Public officials need to set a good model for commoners. I do think that, quote, the humane person likes to instruct and demonstrate to the people, end quote. So yes, we should promote rituals and rightness in society at large, and they will have some effect on the commoners. Even an executed convict is entitled to mourning rituals that have a positive effect on his, quote, wife and children. Still, we need to be realistic. Some people are, quote, incapable of following the way of enlightened sage rulers, end quote. And they need to be controlled by legal punishments, as my student favors. If people follow their instincts, it will lead to disaster. Commoners must be restrained to avoid chaos and conflict, and we need humane public officials who will, quote, for the sake of the whole population, consider the long run and reflect on consequences in order to protect them for 10,000 generations, end quote. In politics, there's nothing more important than selecting and promoting high-quality public officials more likely to submit to ritual and rightness.
Professor Xun, I do worry about your political elitism. Why can't we promote such egalitarian rituals as, like, one person, one vote? We know that single votes are not likely to affect the outcome of elections, but people participate in voting rituals because they feel it's their moral duty to do so. And the ritual in turn generates a sense of community and public spiritedness. That's one reason the least corruption countries tend to be electoral democracies.
I'm not so sure. We need to compare large countries at similar levels of economic development. Electoral democracies such as Indonesia and India are perceived as far more corrupt than China. And the big problem with our village elections, as you know, is that they are so corrupt. Voting rituals do not always or even usually have the transformative effect that we hope for. Perhaps they are too infrequent and lacking in emotional intensity. The deeper problem is that one person, one vote tends to erase distinctions. Rituals, as I mentioned, need to distinguish between the noble and the lowly. With egalitarian voting rituals, the most incompetent and debased people think that they have equal ability to make morally informed political judgments. Commoners rarely vote according to the public interest, and they often select leaders with no political experience who appeal to the people's worst emotions.
Finally, I fully agree with my teacher. It seems completely reckless to place faith in commoners as though they will magically come up with informed political judgments. We need harsh laws, ruthlessly applied with no mercy, to control people's worst instincts.
Well, I didn't mean to suggest that voting rituals per se are sufficient to transform people into public-spirited citizens. We also need civic institutions such as the jury systems, where people participate in politics in a deeper way and on a more regular basis. Alexis de Tocqueville and John Stuart Mill both saw the jury as a school of public virtue. Ordinary people learn to pay attention to others, deliberate about just outcomes, and take responsibility for their collective choices. I also favor such practices as deliberative polling. Randomly selected citizens, advised by experts, learn to make informed political judgments in the public interest. We tried such experiments in China and we need more of them if the concern is to promote public spirit at large.
Perhaps, but we need to be realistic. I don't think we need to aim so high with the general public. I doubt that commoners could be made to think and act in the public interest on a consistent basis. What you suggest involves changing people's minds, but rituals change people's feelings, and that's easier to do. They come to be seen as enjoyable and make people's hearts agreeable by means of collective activities such as dancing, music, chanting, and moving in tandem, without requiring much conscious thinking or understanding of intellectual exchange. Commoners can partake of rituals and get some moral benefit without really understanding the process. Quote, the social divisions contained in the odes and documents and in the rituals and the music are not something an ordinary person will understand, end quote. Frankly, commoners often misunderstand where rituals come from. Quote, to the exemplary person, they are part of the human way. To common people, they are something pertaining to spirits, end quote. But it doesn't matter so long as they partake of the rituals and change somewhat. If we want to promote a degree of public spiritedness among commoners, I'd suggest relying primarily on rituals rather than highly intellectualized deliberations in juries and town halls. But for public officials, we should aim higher. They should have a love of learning and good understanding of the function of ritual propriety and an above average attachment to the public interest, along with a sense of shame that will prevent wrongdoing even when nobody is looking or when the law is silent.
Can you finish? Okay, well, thank you both. It seems like a good time to wrap up. Professor Xun does not deny the necessity of legal punishments to prevent corruption, nor does he deny the importance of providing positive incentives for good behavior, such as higher salaries for public officials. But he argues that only a strong commitment to serving the public can reduce the risk of corruption in the long term, and that social rituals can make people more public-spirited. The political system should aim to select and promote high-quality public officials with a love of learning and the ability and motivation to be transformed by rituals, so they become committed to the public interest and not be swayed by short-term desires and private interests. For commoners, the demands are not so high, but it's nonetheless important to restore and reinvent rituals so that people come to experience a sense of social bonding and care for the humble, as opposed to being left in their nature state where they compete without any restraints for social status and circus resorts.
Okay, so I'm going to set aside the role for a little bit and speak now as Justin Tiwald. So as a friend of the author, I can tell you that he seems to value many rituals very highly, but none so highly as the banquet and the drinking ritual. So what's written into the end of this dialogue is a banquet where Professor Xun presides as the chief libationer over a little bit of drinking. So we're now going to pretend that we've moved on and we've gone to the restaurant, and this is now Professor Xun presiding over the banquet. Okay, it has been a long day. As chief libationer of the Jixia Academy, chief libationer is the old way of referring to the head of the school, the person who's in charge of drinks. It is my obligation to host a drinking ritual followed by a banquet. In accordance with our anti-corruption campaign, the Jixia Academy cannot provide alcohol at public expense. So I've brought a bottle of 20-year-old Maltai from my cellar. Admittedly, it was a gift from the good old corrupt days.
I must recognize that corruption has some benefits.
Well, the main benefit is that traditional drinking rituals generate a sense of social bonding, which we desperately need after this heated debate, I think. Frankly, if it were up to me, I'd allow for alcohol to be provided at public expense.
Professor Shin, you must have a good drinking ability.
Well, I'm more than willing to partake of social drinking, but my drinking ability is quite poor. Plus, I might not remember tonight's festivities if we go overboard. The ritual won't be effective if it doesn't leave a lasting imprint.
Thank you very much to all three speakers, Professor Bell, Professor Wang, and Professor Tiwald. What they have done is to present to you chapter 2 of this book. Chapter 2 is called On Law and Ritual, or How to Combat Corruption, which is also the title of today's seminar. So the dialogue actually consists of two parts. The first part is called Han Fei Zi on law. So it's designed to introduce to you the legalist philosophy of Han Fei. And then the second part of the dialogue is about Shun Zi on ritual. So it's designed to tell you about Sun Tzu, one of the Confucian philosophers, ideas about ritual or li in Chinese, which is a central part of Confucian thinking. But it's not only about li, it's also about morality and education, self-cultivation, and so on. So I think the remainder of today's seminar, maybe we can extend it slightly. So we will have at least 50 minutes or so for general discussion. You are welcome to give comments or ask questions. So maybe I'll first collect the 3 questions or comments. This is the first round of question and comment. So we'll collect 3 and then we'll invite the speakers to respond. Who would like to be the first to speak? Oh, yes.
Hello, my name is Desmond, and I'm upcoming MGP students, so I'm very looking forward to see you, Professor Bell. I have just some comments. I really doubt on the rituals and education towards corruption. Like in the Ming Dynasty, I think all the scholars are studying Confucius study, and it always encouraged 仁义礼孝. And nowadays, the party also organize a lot of 学习会 or 团体学习. But it seems that corruption cases is keep increasing instead of keep decreasing. And for the law aspect, in recent months, President Xi has criticized some officials, 懒政, which is called lazy in politics, and 好人们文化, which is they're not doing anyway because of fear of being caught. So I was wondering if what's the view of Professor Bell on the recent measures that our government or central government is doing on anti-corruption, especially as you mentioned before, in China we're working on 贤能政治 instead of one people, one vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So yes, please. That's Sarah, my colleague Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you all. That was a wonderful conversation. My question is, in the modern world, how do we might find a modern equivalent for commoners Because nowadays everyone has education. I guess that might be one big distinction from ancient China. So do you think that we can still use this ancient category of commoners anymore? We might still have officials, but do you think that the same objections of using ritual to civilize the commoners might still be relevant nowadays? Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have a third member of the audience.
Hi, thank you so much for the interesting dialogue. I have a few questions about legalism. And please forgive me for my lack of knowledge. I just started learning about classical Confucianism. So I read the dialogue as almost like a debate between how much discretion to leave in the law and legalist tradition. It was I guess like there are two interpretations that seemed possible. The legalist position argues for the complete sort of elimination of discretion. So that's one interpretation that I had. Another interpretation that I had was legalist position sort of like advocates for the maximal removal of discretion. And those two positions seemed slightly different. And I was wondering which one Professor Bell's character was up. Complete removal of discretion versus maximal removal of discretion. And I was wondering which one the legalist position was arguing for.
So the difference is between assuming that you could completely get rid of discretionary judgments
Yeah.
on one hand, or on the other hand, being a little bit more realistic and saying, okay, you can't completely get rid of them. You should try as much as possible to minimize.
Yeah. And those are two different positions, and I wasn't clear which one was being advocated for. And if the first one is the legalist position, the complete removal of discretion, that seemed almost impossible to me. Like every law comes with a discretionary exercise, right? Like there are many different ways to interpret one sentence, for instance.
Yeah.
So and ought imply can, right? And in that case, the ought imply can rule seems to be violated. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, we have completed the first round of questions. So maybe any of our three speakers can speak.
So you want to start, or?
Maybe you can. Sorry,
Okay.
who would like to start?
Well, I could very briefly. Thank you. They're all excellent questions. As far as Han Fei's position, he does seem to argue for a kind of maximalist position where we would have laws that eliminate any discretion. But in his dialogue, I agree that's kind of implausible position. So I did allow for the possibility that he would say, well, maybe in some extreme cases, but overall, I want to minimize discretion. I think that's more or less kind of a way of rendering his position more defensible. I don't know. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah. I think thank you. I think the way to understand the legalist ideal is essentially that you're trying to use the sort of institutional machinery of state to set up a machine which can run in a relatively stable and reliable way, no matter how mediocre the people you put into the machine.
Yeah.
So
mediocre, the rulers,
including the ruler, right? Yeah. So sometimes people say that legalism recommends so-called objective criteria, that you measure whether someone should get promoted or demoted according to some kind of productivity number or something like that. What they mean by objective criteria essentially is something like rules or criteria that any old dummy could apply. That's what they mean by objective. And so they want to make it so that all the rules are so simple that you don't have to rely on anyone's good judgment to figure out whether they're complying with the rules or not.
Yeah, and that's why I wasn't really a joke why I said that AI can make this ideal more plausible, because you can imagine, AI doing this in a more efficient and rational way compared to what any human could do. So I think if there's a modern Han Fei, he'd probably endorse the use of AI to regulate people and to have rules that are as clear and transparent and easy to understand and accessible as possible, right? In a way that may not have been feasible in his own day. That said, I mean, they did establish, based on legalist ideas, the first modern bureaucratic system in the world, right? The Qin dynasty was, the Qin state eventually conquered the others and established the first dynasty, and it established the first modern day, you know, what looks like a kind of modern bureaucracy where every village would have the kind of post of, these are the rules and you need to obey them. And it was pretty ruthlessly applied, of course. So going back to my own, well, maybe the point about citizens and commoners. So of course today, maybe at least in English, you might not say the word commoners, we would say the word citizens, but I think the point still applies that at least in a Chinese context, when there's a long history and tradition of political meritocracy, you want public officials to have above average ability and virtue means at minimum, don't be corrupt, right? Be at least be willing to important extent to serve the public, not your own family and private interest. So there's much higher demands on public officials compared to whatever we call the others, commoners, citizens, whatever. I think that's, in the Chinese context, it's really essential to understand. I think still very much part of the discourse, right? Yeah, okay, the people. Yeah. Okay, people. Yeah. Yeah, and about the first question, what do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I thought that was a good point. So I think that some of the more dismissive things that Xunzi says about commoners are even, I think, first of all, they were too dismissive. So I think that he underestimates the common sense and the sort of capacity of uneducated people to sort of track their own interests and recognize when governance is really off base, is really bad. But I think whatever those claims are, they're even less warranted now because people in general are better educated than they were then.
Yeah, I'm not persuaded. I mean, partly it's a social scientific question, and there's so much evidence now that voters are not rational. It's really hard to be optimistic about common people. Sorry, whatever you call them. So, but anyway, yeah, about the other question, you know, about, it's true in the Ming Dynasty and the Qing dynasties, they both had training in the Confucian classics, and they both collapsed, at least partly because of corruption that got out of control. But the question is, did they practice ritual in the sense that Xunzi advocates, right? I mean, that's not, you know, just blindly preparing for an exam. That's not, you know, Xunzi's idea of ritual that engages with emotions and transforms people and make them more other regarding. So that's different, right? And including now, you know, maybe there's, I mean, yeah, in the book, there's more on the contemporary situation. We deleted partly for time reasons. Yeah, my own view for what it's worth is that maybe legalism is necessary in the short term. But so first of all, the point about this book is not to advocate my own view. I want to present both views in as balanced a way as possible, right? But if you were to press me, my own view is that, you know, I think we had a very good discussion about this in the podcast, right?
Yeah.
That the legalists present themselves as realists. Maybe they're realists in the short term, but not in the long term. I mean, there's no evidence that this, you know, cruelty and harshness and fear has long-term success, right? The Qin dynasty collapsed after 15 years. Why? I mean, just people rebel when they get a chance to do so.
Yeah. The idea is, I think this is right, that mere threat of punishment is just a paper-thin basis for motivating compliance with rules and that sort of thing and good behavior. And it doesn't last. It's, you know, it's not effective when people's eyes are turned, when someone's acting in private, or they're not being, you know, surveilled or what have you. So I think that's a very good point. I also wanted to say that we could, I think that the examples you gave, I sympathize with the points that you made about the sort of lack of success in the Ming Dynasty or even the Xue Hui, you know, nowadays, the kind of study groups. But I think those are not good examples of the sort of education that Confucianism at its very best recommends. So first of all, Xunzi his sort of model of education isn't merely coercive. It's not just that people are being forced to study as they are in the Xue Hui. Those are always unpleasant. I mean, I'm from the US originally, but I started studying in China in 1994. And back then we could still have Chinese roommates. And I remember my Chinese roommates, including some who were true believers, you know, hated their propaganda classes, the kind of, you know, Marxist propaganda classes. Why? Because they were forced to go, right? It just didn't feel like it wasn't, they didn't choose it. It was not self-selected. They weren't sort of interested for that reason. And I think there's a kind of deep insight there that is really prominent in other Confucian philosophers, maybe not so much in Xunzi, but people like Zhu Xi, Wang Yangming, who sort of hold up this idea of 自得, getting it yourself, which says that no, people have to be motivated in this kind of careful, stepwise manner by curiosity and love of learning and a desire for self-improvement. And I actually think the resources are there in the later Confucian tradition, especially, to introduce the right sort of education in the right way, so that it's not just people being forced to go to 学习会, you know.
So about the corruption, I've heard one explanation, but just one kind of explanation for your reference. Someone mentioned that before the collapse of Soviet Union, but many people said that now China has severe corruption phenomenon. It's because of the 改革开放, it's the openness, because of the like the booming of economy. But on the other hand, someone raised one issue that it's just like synchronicity at the same time happened is that the Soviet Union collapsed. So it's still the same bunch of people working in the whole system, but they were so like qinglian previously, and now they're so corrupted. So there was an explanation saying that that's because of the collapse of Soviet Union and the true belief, they were believers, gone. So why believe in communism? Yeah, the belief was gone. And what do? Just, well, be a corrupted government official. Why not? So someone compare that to the loss of your father or loss of one of your parents. Like we can see many middle-aged men, women, usually women were more and more. But anyway, like when they lost their parents and all of a sudden they become to like behave like out of no reason, doing something immoral. Like some person who was quite like a gentleman previously, then all of a sudden he started to harass young girls. Why? So some people will say that that's because we do not have the 3 years of mourning rituals. Probably we use 3 years of mourning rituals to deal with the middle-age crisis, or somehow probably we didn't figure it out, our relation with previous existing Soviet Union. I mean, for mainland China, we never figured it out yet. One day, if they figure it out, some kind of belief can be reestablished in the form way as it existed previously. Probably it was so. That's my just kind of explanation.
I think that's great. I wish I had put that in my book. Wish you had told me earlier. But anyway, but I'm not so, it's true, I think maybe now there's a bit of revival of faith in communism, I think, at least among the students at Shandong University who were really aspiring to, it was very competitive to join the ruling organization. Some of them did really have good knowledge of the social tradition and some genuine attachment to it, which may be a good sign for a reduction of corruption in the future. Yeah, you need both Confucianism and communism. Yeah.
So thank you. I think we unfortunately don't have time for another round of questions. We have already exceeded the allotted time for this seminar. So
sorry, I want to hear your take on corruption in China now.
Okay, so maybe I'll just say a few concluding remarks. And then we'll close. So first, I think I would recommend to all of you this very interesting book on why ancient Chinese political thought matters. I think we should all understand whether ancient Chinese political thought matters today. As people here in Hong Kong, we are in this project, one country, two systems, but also in the project of this rejuvenation of Chinese culture and civilization. So I think people in Hong Kong should be interested in ancient Chinese political thought and should reflect on its relevance to China and to the world today. And I think Professor Bells has done a very good job in presenting the ancient Chinese political thought in this very interesting format of dialogues. Just like the ancient Greek political philosopher Plato, many of his books are also in the form of dialogues. I suppose you are trying to revive Platonic dialogue for the Chinese point of view.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. And I did first come across the dialogue form by reading Plato as an undergraduate. But a lot of the dialogues by Plato, they're not really serious dialogues. I mean, especially towards the end, it's like the other saying, yes, Socrates, I agree, Socrates, let me follow your view, Socrates. But the ancient Chinese thinkers really did have serious engagement with each other and in a very serious dialogue. So yeah, I mean, think of the way that Xunzi criticized Mo. So, for example.
Yes, so you may not be able to know what part of what the speaker said were in quotation marks in the book, but in fact, quite a lot of the dialogue consists of exact quotations from the English translation of these classical texts by Han Feizi and Xunzi and so on. So by studying this book, you also be able to learn some of the original sayings or writings of these classical Chinese philosophers and thinkers. So secondly, and lastly, I would like to say a few words about my own thinking about the topic of today's seminar. So on law and ritual, how best to combat corruption. So I think there's no doubt that as in traditional Chinese civilization, traditional Chinese history, there is a synthesis of Confucianism and legalism. So both Confucian and legalist elements can be found in Chinese traditional culture and civilization and governance in the last 2,000 years or so. So in this seminar, Confucianism is represented by Xunzi's view on ritual, and legalism is represented by Han Feizi's view on law, and not just law, but also on the administration, on officials, on the relationship between the ruler and his officials, etc. So as far as today is concerned, I think both Confucian and legalist elements exist in China's political system and legal system and educational system and so on. So from a point of view of corruption control, it is certainly important to have adequate laws and legal institutions to deal with officials or cadres who engage in corruption. Just like in Hong Kong, we have the ICAC. Okay, so maybe the ICAC is a legalist institution. The other day, I was invited to give a lecture at the ICAC to ICAC staff. So I was also invited to look at the exhibition. There was an exhibition actually in the ICAC building in North Point on the history and the system of corruption control in Hong Kong. And I was told that this exhibition is widely visited by tourists from mainland. In fact, when I was at the ICAC building, I also saw quite a lot of mainland tourists visiting the exhibition. And the ICAC officials told me that many tourists come to visit this exhibition because it is quite effectively advertised in Xiaohongshu. So those of you who are familiar with Xiaohongshu may check whether this is actually true, but I believe it's true. That is advertised, the ICAC exhibition in Hong Kong. So corruption control, Hong Kong ICAC, so many people in mainland know about it. But as far as I understand, ICAC is not just a legalist institution. It is also, in a sense, a Confucian institution, because quite a significant proportion of the staff of ICAC are not engaged in investigation of corruption and so on. They're engaged in education. They're engaged in promoting the values and the principles that underlie the anti-corruption work of the ICAC. So, because if people don't understand the ethics behind the anti-corruption laws, they will not be able, they will not be complying with the laws voluntarily. They will only comply with the laws just because of fear of punishment. And that's what the Confucians are against, because Confucius himself said that, I think that might have been quoted in this, in the dialogue just now, that you should not just force people to obey the law because of fear of punishment. You should educate people so that they understand what is right and wrong, and voluntarily comply with what the law requires. So that is Confucian idea, that so corruption control is should ultimately not be based simply on fear of being arrested and prosecuted if one engages in corruption. Officials and caterers, people are all servants of the people, so they should understand what is the meaning, the mission of being officials in serving the people. So if they understand these ethics of being officials and servants of the people, they would not engage in corruption. I think that a lot of this was also written in I think is it Liu Shaoqi wrote a book about communist pledges. So
How to be a good
it's
communist.
by Liu Shaoqi, is that right? So I'm not familiar with, I haven't studied that book, but I know that it is very important work, and that also represents the synthesis between synthesis of Chinese communism and traditional Confucianism in advocating the ethics for officials.
Is there a mourning period in Hong Kong for public officials if their parents die? Or
No, unfortunately not. Hong Kong inherited the British culture and institution. So our civil service system was based on the British model. So probably very little for Confucian or traditional Chinese elements. Okay, yeah. So that is my own view. I think the dialogue or the presentation you've heard today is very much relevant to China and Hong Kong today. Very much relevant to everyone who is engaged in educational work in Hong Kong or elsewhere. And so we should all or revise or learn or revisit the ancient wisdom of Confucianism and legalism. So thank you. So we will close here. Thank you all for attending. I think we have a very good attendance today. And thank you to all the speakers. So we hope we will meet again in the foreseeable future. Thank you.